With this, we finally come to the hero-savior or the seeker of knowledge. Mythological representations of this actor include the eye, self, phallus, plough, consciousness, enlightened one, a trickster or a fool, a hero or a coward, a spirit as opposed to the matter, as opposed to dogma, the sun. In Warcraft 3, the heroic aspect of the dual-natured sun covers the role of the far-seeing one. His magic involves revealing unknown parts of terrain, becoming acquainted with what lies ahead. Therefore, he represents both the eye and the light. He is the first orc of the New World to whom the spirits of nature reveal themselves, making him the ultimate shaman, bearer of the powers of earth, air, fire, water, and the wild. Hence, he is a representative of the ethereal, spirit as opposed to matter, but also as opposed to the demonic dogma of the warlocks. Thrall as a shaman carries the spiritual aspects, while as a war chief he manifests heroism. From the orcish perspective, he is clearly a member of their race, the known, but raised within human culture, the unknown. He is the son of Durotan, chieftain of the Frostwolf clan, and Draka, a warrior woman whose name irresistibly evokes the Latin term for serpent or dragon, Draco. Thus, he embodies the Great Father and the Great Mother. However, of all the mentioned representations, one phenomenon remains particularly interesting. I am convinced that it is crucial to emphasize consciousness or enlightenment both in regards to the content of the game and because the role it plays in cosmogonic narratives. Although birth is often treated as the starting point of creation in interpretations of myths, Northrop Frye, in his interpretation of the biblical story, offers a different perspective. He argues that the concept of beginning is metaphorically tied to the moment of waking from sleep, symbolizing a transition from one world to another. This awakening, which leads to a greater sense of reality, echoes the creation narrative in Genesis, where the world emerges through speech and consciousness. It is seen as a passing from a world where everyone has his own logos into a world where there is a common logos. The narrative part of Warcraft 3 begins with the prologue Exodus of the Horde. The short film that opens it provides us with the metaphor of creation. The cryptic messages addressed to Durotan's son, conveyed by the prophet's voice, are accompanied by a slow panorama of a rugged yet beautiful land under a red sky. Pollen drifts through the air as a raven, death, prophet, psychopomp, a mediator between the material and spiritual world, and the mythical ancestor of souls, gazes wearily and suspiciously, foreshadowing unrest. Soon we witness the charge of two armies, orcish and human, but among the mass of warriors one pauses, looking around and directing his gaze to the sky. The scene is framed in such a way that, due to Sun's position relative to the orcish army, it gives the impression that this figure emerges from the light. That figure is Thrall, who perceives that the heavens are splitting and that a reign of chaos is coming. Soon the raven, now in the form of the prophet, speaks directly into the camera and calls on the viewer to gather the people and lead them across the ocean. This call awakens Thrall, distressed and sweaty, and the film gradually fades. Warcraft 3 actually begins with the awakening of the hero-savior. Individual awakening in the world of personal logos, where amidst the senseless charge of the masses, the self, or I, stands apart, gets transformed into the first step towards the collective awakening in reality. The old world of endless conflict, whose outcome can only be destruction, is replaced by a new one. The archetypal potential of tradition enters the process of reconfiguration with the symbolic birth of the actor, or consciousness, or light in a figurative sense. From this we understand that the dream is tradition or heritage, the old world. But since the dream is also Thrall's vision, it represents his awakening to the consequences that unaltered heritage can bring. And if we add all this to the earlier argument in favor of the idea that Gul'dan is the destructive aspect of the bivalent sun, we will not be surprised that one of the names he gives himself is the Destroyer of Dreams. For while Thrall leads to awakening through the transcendence of the inherited, Gul'dan, by destroying it, leads to darkness, that is, the absence of all consciousness, even if it is a hazy reflection of accumulated past deeds. The opening scene of the Exodus of the Horde depicts the process of the awakening of consciousness as the cause for unrest, a theme present in mythological narratives across various cultures. The raven's unease elevates the dream of a bird into the vision of the prophet. The warning from this mysterious figure leads to Thrall's awakening and unrest. His enlightenment and the subsequent movement of the horde towards Kalimdor brings about unrest among the orcs, especially within Grom. All of this ultimately leads to tensions during the dangerous journey and a split when the warchief voluntarily embarks on a quest for answers. This division, however, is necessary due to the fact that only a qualitative transformation of both individual and collective worldviews can resolve the spreading unrest. To achieve this, the positive aspect of the Great Mother must be integrated into the rigid structures of the Great Father. The hero thus participates in this process but cannot accomplish it alone. After the second split, Goel sets out for the Stone Talon Peak in search of the Oracle. As he ascends the peak, he encounters humans but remains puzzled by their intentions, particularly the fact that they do not attack the orcs. He is assisted by Cairn, who introduces him to the existence of wyverns and suggests they be persuaded to join their cause, a task that involves battling the harpies who have enslaved them. After incorporating this force of nature into his ranks, the war chief reaches the peak only to find Jaina entering the cave he is also heading towards. This is particularly interesting since a cave is primarily associated with the base, not the heights. However, the combination of these elements might symbolize the unification of the Great Father, the height, and the Great Mother, the depth, where Thrall, after overcoming the ascent and the battle with the humans, that is, the legacy of the past, enters the jaws of the unknown in an attempt to understand his destiny. The descent into the underworld is a widely recognized archetype. The hero dives into terrifying yet creative depths, exposing himself to danger, but aware that only in the environment of peril can he find the treasure. The cave is associated with the feminine aspect due to its connection to the earth and fertility, but also to its resemblance to the female genitalia. Warcraft 3 aptly portrays the underworld as a combination of a cave, the hell, a prison, and the remnants of the elven architecture. Thus, it is also a reflection of the Earth Mother, as described by Cairn, the home of her combative incarnation, the antechamber of the Chaos Dragon, and a symbol of Thrall's beginning, the dungeon in which he was confined during his gladiatorial days. In any case, the war chief arrives at the Oracle only to encounter Jaina. At this point, things get complicated. It is difficult to determine the creator's intentions, but the way they develop this part of the campaign leaves a significant plot hole concerning the unexplained relationship between the Prophet, who has appeared to both Thrall and Jaina from the beginning of the Warcraft saga, and the Oracle that Cairn speaks of. The presence of elven architecture and the petrified Princess Ajun suggests a long history of that area, raising questions about whether there existed an oracle known to the races of Kalimdor, or if it had always been the Prophet. This confusion is further exacerbated by Thrall's reaction to the Prophet's appearance.
"You're no oracle. You're the Prophet."
The difference between these two is not insignificant. The Oracle is what it is. It doesn't go anywhere or convince anyone. People come to it. On the other hand, this is not the case with the Prophet. He is active, conveying messages, persuading and motivating others to take action. However, experience with the array of characters shows that his words mostly fall on deaf ears. Even in the case of Jaina and Thrall, skepticism remains, as does an initial readiness for conflict despite the circumstances and the Prophet's warnings. And I believe that here lies the key to understanding the relationship between the two. To clarify this, we must turn to Peterson and first ask the following question. Could a collaboration between humans and orcs have been possible in Azeroth? We mentioned in the first video tied to Arthas' story that to the extent that Uther and he represent Lordaeron, the fact that Jaina only comes into contact with Thrall after crossing the ocean suggests that an alliance wouldn't have been formed even if Uther had taken up the fight instead of Arthas. However, this was in relation to Lordaeron as a form of human organization into a state entity, not Azeroth as a continent. But for the argument I want to build, Azeroth itself is not important. Rather, it's Jaina and Thrall within it. The individuals we meet in the old world are not the same as the actors who meet at the Oracle. The journey has transformed them. Jaina embarks on this voyage after witnessing the catastrophe of Arthas' fall, while Thrall and the Horde without lands or cities to call home set off before such a development. Yet neither of them knows the prophet's intentions, nor do they expect him to persuade them into cooperating with the other side. Turning back to Peterson's work, we see that experiences considered taboo by the current moral standards might hold the potential for creative solutions to unresolved or future problems. He suggests that these forbidden experiences could offer untapped possibilities for redemption. Narratives featuring a traveling sage, a wandering magician, or a courageous adventurer highlight the value of such experiences. Pilgrimage rituals, where one leaves the safety of familiar culture to embark on a challenging journey to unknown holy places, symbolically represent this process of personal growth, integration, and maturity. Such quests may fulfill their purpose even if the ultimate goal, like the Holy Grail, remains unattainable. Seen from this perspective, the prophet knows that persuading them to undertake joint action from the outset would be futile. It is only through the transformative pilgrimage that the potential for cooperation arises, through a radical transformation of perception. Although we don't know how Jaina decided to head toward the oracle, we see that Thrall believes it is there that he will learn about the fate of his people. That outcome remains the final, impossible purpose, but the journey through Kalimdor and the unknown but sacred depths of the cave where the oracle is supposedly located leads to the catalyzation of the psychic process of expansion, integration, and maturation. Therefore, it remains irrelevant what the oracle is or where Cairn's story about its origin and location came from. What matters is that for the local species, the Tauren, it is a sacred land, that the orcs are heading toward it, that the prophet reveals his intention to lead them together. What matters is that humans and orcs manage to restrain themselves from conflict and emerge from the cave as allies. At this point, the entire relationship shifts dramatically. In Thrall's case, the old schema is dismantled, allowing for a reconfiguration and strengthening through a qualitative transition from the behavioral model of the old horde to the behavioral model of the new horde. The forces under his command are stronger and more numerous than before, and they have the support of the remnants of the Alliance. On the other hand, when it comes to the units under Grom's control, dismantling arises by sheer chance. The appearance of the unknown after persistent dismissal of danger leads to the rapid disintegration of the community and the establishment of a new, subordinate relationship with demons. The crisis reaches its peak, and now orcs stand against each other. Thrall's first transgression against the war song, sending them to do physical labor, is compounded by the unforgivable alliance with humans. Not only do they see him as a bad leader because of what is perceived as wrong decisions, but he now also becomes a traitor. Therefore, in one of the interactions between the conflicting sides, the demon-tainted orcs first hurl insults.
You are the humans' lapdog. We serve only the Legion now.
And then blows. The schism manifests. But as I said, a hero wouldn't be a hero if he didn't try to save his teacher and brother from the demonic embrace, and in this endeavor, Jaina is irreplaceable. The main characteristic of the hero lies in the fact that he is neither an enemy nor a slave to the culture. Precisely because of this, Thrall strives equally to avoid the anarchy of civil war and the tyranny of demonic rule. However, to succeed in this, he needs the essence of the Great Father. He needs legitimacy and the salvation of positive heritage. Therefore, after breaking through the demon hordes and the inevitable clash with the extremist orcs, he finds himself face to face with Grom, and at that point learns that the curse on Draenor did not come out of nowhere but was the result of a conscious choice. Yet Thrall does not kill Hellscream, but rather captures his soul using a gem he receives from Jaina. In this way, he manages to bring him back to the base without harming him. In the end, through the combined efforts of Thrall's shamans and Jaina's wizards, Grom comes to his senses. Just as Gul'dan exploited one aspect of tradition to plunge the entire community into the embrace of demons, Thrall now rescues that same aspect from extremism, intending to free the rest of the Warsong clan from Manaroth's control. That's why he decides to strike at the heart of the problem, to slay the Hydra, and he embarks on this mission together with Grom. This testifies to the idea of rescuing what is positive in the Orcish heritage, saving heroism, honor, strength, and warrior skills, but it equally testifies to Grom's awakening as an individual. From the closing cinematic we see that Thrall does not manage to inflict serious damage on Manoroth and is easily overpowered. It will be Grom, the manifestation of this heroic tradition, refined by Goel's leadership and the hope he gives, who will defeat the demon but also perish in the process. This way, Grom dies as an actor, while in a metaphorical sense the dual leadership disappears and the long process of cultural reconfiguration is concluded. The transformation of individual consciousness results in the transformation of the collective. The fire vanishes from the eyes of orcs tainted by Fel, peace is established in the soul of every individual, and the joint struggle with other races results in the victory over the Burning Legion. The passing of the old and the birth of the new brings peace in the form of a new home on a part of Kalimdor's land that resembles Draenor, but also the vastness from Thrall's dreams. The mythical paradise is regained. In this situation, the war chief decides to name the first city Orgrimmar and the land Durotar, in honor of the heroes of old. On one hand, this decision testifies to the idea of continuity. The community is not created from scratch, but rests on the accumulated wisdom of the dead, enriched by the exploratory creative potential of the living. However, this does not answer the question of why Orgrim is associated with city and Durotan with the land. My belief is that the city symbolizes the realization of the known. Its walls are literal protection from the foreign, its streets the bloodstream of the community. This is understandable given that Orgrim was the war chief of the old horde who preserved them in the new world and stopped the machinations of the warlocks. He is the manifestation of the heroism of yesteryear as well as order and organization. However, this is not enough. Thrall met Orgrim, learned about his origins from him, but in the process also received advice to leave Grom. The old leader saw only a destructive force tainted by demonic energies in Hellscream. In doing so, he deprived himself of an ally which, no matter how potentially destructive, still contained a positive aspect and had to play a role in the liberation. Moreover, such a decision partially symbolizes a return to the principle of intertribal distance that Durotan sought to overcome. Thrall knows that salvation and deliverance are impossible unless they are universal. Therefore, he cannot accept the rift between these two and strives to achieve complete unification. It is precisely in this that I recognize the symbolism of the decision to name the territory Durotar. For it too, as an explored space, is an aspect of the known, but not its realization like the city, rather its potential. Therefore, with this decision, Thrall testifies to his belief that the heroic deeds of previous times can only have meaning as long as they are framed by the great ideas of exploration, questioning, and unification, which are a part of Orcish heritage, although previously suppressed by the actions of destructive forces. Their potential is equal to the potential of the known expanse. Only such a city in such a land offers hope because it represents the protective framework of tradition within the heroic transformative process that mediates between the capital and the unknown realms beyond the borders of Durotar. In this way, Thrall also identifies with the aforementioned duo, or rather the heritage, as does every orc who is a part of this community. Thus, from a hero and a leader in the making, we get the wise king, the bearer of legitimate power, who resides within the concentric circles of positive heritage. From the slave, we get the redeemer, the deliverer, and the covenant keeper. Thank you for watching.